In May 2007, in the quiet Czech town of Kuzim, a baby monitor accidentally picked up a signal that pointed to one of Europe's most troubling child mistreatment cases. What began as a neighbor's quick check on his baby became the key to protecting two boys from ongoing harm. This story isn't told to shock you, but to show how serious misconduct can blend into ordinary routines, even in close communities and devout households. Kujim reveals how lies, coercion, and misplaced trust created years of pain that went unnoticed. But here's the question: how could a small household device notice what an entire town missed? How could one faint signal open a door to a truth so unusual that even investigators hesitated to believe it? Behind that accidental recording lay a web of deception so strange, it would stun Europe. No child should face harm in silence. By learning from Kuzim, we strengthen vigilance and protection. If this message matters to you, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can recognize early warning signs. Now, let's begin at the center of it all: two young boys whose bright smiles once lit up the streets of Kuzim. In the quiet Czech town of Kuzim, where cobblestone streets wind between centuries-old buildings and new playgrounds, two brothers, Andrei and Jakub Mawerova, were living the kind of childhood every child deserves. The year was 2006, and life moved at the gentle pace of a small community where neighbors greeted each other by name, and children played freely until the streetlights flickered on. 8-year-old Andrei had a mischievous streak. He loved sneaking into his grandmother's kitchen, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her famous apple strudel cooling on the windowsill. She would pretend not to notice as he quietly broke off a corner, his guilty smile always giving him away. His older brother Jakub, age 9, preferred the outdoors, patient and thoughtful. He spent afternoons in his grandfather's garden, learning to tie tomato vines and pull carrots from the soil. On the soccer field behind their school, the brothers were inseparable. Jakub made sure his younger brother got plenty of chances with the ball, while Andrei's laughter carried across the neighborhood pure joy that made even hurried adults pause and smile. Teachers described them as bright and kind, Jakub quick to raise his hand in science lessons, Andrei filling classroom walls with his colorful drawings, both eager to help classmates who struggled. The Maurova home on Veviska Street was filled with warmth. Family photos captured backyard birthdays, Christmas mornings scattered with wrapping paper, and quiet evenings where the boys worked on homework at the kitchen table while their mother prepared dinner. Their grandparents lived only a few streets away, and Sunday dinners were a cherished ritual. 3 generations gathered around one table, sharing food, laughter, and stories. Friends, this story is told with care. We focus not on graphic detail, but on understanding warning signs and the systems that must protect children. If these topics are sensitive for you, please take care as we continue. But by late 2006, small cracks began to appear in this happy picture. The boy's father left, and while the community admired Clara's strength as a single mother, something in the family dynamic shifted. Visits to the grandparents grew less frequent. Clara explained the boys needed to focus on their studies. Weekend soccer games were skipped. She said they were helping more at home, at school. Teachers noticed they had grown quieter, more withdrawn, each time. Clara offered reasonable explanations. The divorce was hard on them. They were adjusting. They just needed time. Children don't always speak their struggles out loud. Instead, they whisper them through small changes, when laughter fades, when friendships quietly slip away, when the spark in their eyes grows dim for reasons no one can quite explain. These are not moments to brush aside. They are signals, gentle but urgent, asking for our attention. No one could have imagined that this subtle dimming of 2 bright lights was the first shadow of something far darker approaching. The peace of Kudim would not last, as something sinister was already threading its way into the Maurova household. Behind the doors of the Maurova house, Another story was unfolding, one that would soon reveal how even the most familiar faces can conceal unexpected risks. Klara Maurova, 31, was known as a devoted mother. With her teaching degree, her presence at school events, and her reputation for being deeply involved in her sons' lives, she earned admiration across Kuzim. After her husband left, neighbors praised her resilience, organizing summer camps, maintaining the household, never missing a parent-teacher conference. She attended church, volunteered at community events, and always had neat explanations for any concern. Who would question a mother who seemed so visibly dedicated? But court documents would later reveal that Klara's dedication had transformed into something dangerous under the influence of her older sister. Katarzyna Maurova, 33, worked at the Papasek Youth Center, a position that gave her both respectability and access to vulnerable families. Colleagues would later testify about the unsettling dynamic between the sisters, how Klara seemed to shrink in Katarzyna's presence, deferring to her on everything from parenting decisions to what groceries to buy. One coworker recalled feeling uncomfortable watching Katarzyna's control over her younger sister. But what could anyone say? It was just sibling dynamics, wasn't it then? In early 2007, a new figure entered the picture, Anichka. Introduced as a 13-year-old Norwegian girl rescued from a criminal network. She seemed frail, with claims of leukemia, kidney failure, and partial hearing and vision loss. Klara explained that the child was too traumatized for official foster care channels. So the family had taken her in privately. Neighbors saw compassion. They saw sacrifice. But bypassing official systems is never just a technicality, it is a documented red flag. When stories avoid scrutiny instead of inviting support, they demand closer attention. The following part involves deception and distortion of faith that may be unsettling. We share it to understand how trust and belief can be exploited, and why vigilance matters in every community. But Anichka was not who she claimed to be. Anichka, of course, was no child. She was Barbara Shkrlova, 34 years old, whose medical condition gave her a youthful appearance. Court testimony revealed her to be the daughter of Josef Shkrla, the leader of a breakaway sect expelled from the Grail movement in 1996 for twisting spirituality into a web of control and fear. Joseph himself never stepped into the Maurova house. Instead, he existed as the doctor, a distant but constant voice, through hundreds of texts and emails later presented in court. He crafted a narrative of fear. He told Klara that Anichka required extraordinary care, that doctors and hospitals could not help her, and, most dangerously, that her sons, Andrei and Jakub, were spiritually tainted. He warned they carried dark forces that threatened Anichka's fragile life. This was more than strict faith. It was religious distortion at its most dangerous. The messages combined fragments of spiritual language with psychological manipulation, creating a closed system where only obedience seemed safe. To Klara, the line between devotion and delusion blurred until control disguised itself as salvation. Meanwhile, those around her saw only the surface: a compassionate mother, a fragile girl, a family pulling together in hardship. Even the boy's father, who had raised concerns about Klara's alarming shifts in behavior before the divorce, was dismissed as bitter and resentful. After all, the evidence of her sacrifice seemed plain to see. But the most dangerous individuals who exploit trust often wear masks of virtue. When stories are built to deflect questions, when faith isolates instead of unites, when guidance comes with fear instead of hope, these are not small quirks. They are red flags waving in plain sight. And in Kuzim, those warnings were missed. The shadow spreading through the Maurova home was only just beginning to take hold, tightening around a mother's mind and dimming the voices of two boys who had once filled their street with laughter. What followed was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual unraveling step by step, message by message, behind closed doors. Faith was twisted into fear. Love was reshaped into suspicion. And a mother who once nurtured her children began to see them through the lens of an enemy she imagined was hiding inside them. Before going further, it's important to know what follows are warning signs. They are difficult to hear, but essential to recognize early. These details are not shared for shock, they are lessons. Reminders of how subtle shifts can grow into something far more dangerous if overlooked. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Court documents later traced the escalation back to late 2006, when the doctor's messages began arriving more frequently. Each text, each email, built carefully upon the last, creating an alternate reality where Clara's maternal instincts were turned against her own children. Anichka's getting sicker. One message read, "The negative energy from the boys is affecting her recovery. You must be vigilant." Another urged, "Their disobedience isn't normal childhood behavior, it's spiritual resistance. They need special discipline to save their souls." These messages, later read aloud in court, revealed a calculated campaign of coercive control, one that preyed on Clara's fears and reshaped her beliefs. At first, the changes inside the household seemed almost reasonable, easy for outsiders to dismiss. Under the sect's influence, Clara introduced what she called a spiritual discipline program. Andrei and Jakub were withdrawn from after-school activities, no more soccer practice, no art club, no birthday parties, to teachers. Clara explained that the boys needed prayer and reflection, to grandparents. She said the boys were too busy or too ill to visit. This gradual withdrawal didn't raise alarms at the time. But isolation is one of mistreatment's most powerful allies. When children vanish from the things that once brought them joy, when family ties are severed without clear reason, these aren't parenting choices, they are red flags. Inside the Mauerover home, the atmosphere shifted completely. Clara no longer saw her sons with love, but with suspicion. When 8-year-old Andrei laughed at a cartoon, she interpreted defiance. When 9-year-old Jakub asked to visit his grandfather's garden, she heard rebellion. Normal childhood behaviors crying after a fall, bickering over toys, asking for a treat were reinterpreted as signs of the evil the doctor had warned about. And Barbara, still in her role as the fragile child Anichka, became the boys' accuser. "They looked at me with hate," she whispered. "My headache grew worse when they passed by." Each complaint pushed Clara deeper into the sect's distorted narrative. Reflection. Friends, details like these are not shared to sensationalize. They show us why sudden isolation, the loss of joy, or severed family ties should never be dismissed as ordinary. They are signals that demand attention. What would you do if you noticed a child disappearing from the activities they once loved? The restrictions began gradually, disguised as acts of faith. Bedtimes became enforced silence for prayer. Mealtimes became moments of spiritual discipline. Step by step, the boys' world grew smaller, until the laughter that once filled Kujim's streets had fallen quiet. Children in situations like this rarely voice their fear. The source of danger is also their source of survival. That silence shields those in control, not the children. By then, Andrei and Jakub were truly alone. Their father was gone, their grandparents cut off, their teachers reassured with explanations that seemed plausible. The community that had once celebrated this family's devotion never imagined that, behind their door, childhood itself was under attack. And here lies the lesson. When excuses repeat too often, when joy fades without cause, when children slip quietly out of their support networks, these are not minor issues, they are sirens. Teachers, relatives, neighbors, social services all saw fragments of the truth, but no one connected the dots until it was too late. And so, while Kujim carried on in peace, the darkness inside the Mauerover home deepened. What began as whispers of doubt had become a grip on a mother's mind, pulling her sons into a nightmare the community could not yet imagine. But the sect was not finished. The manipulation that had reshaped a mother's love into suspicion was about to demand even more. What follows is deeply unsettling. These details are shared not to sensationalize, but to honor the truth and to remind us why vigilance in protecting children is so vital. Under the direction of the Dr. Joseph Shkrela's fabricated identity, the Maurova family was moved in March 2007 to an isolated cottage in Viverska Bitishka. Court records describe this location as deliberately chosen for its remoteness, a place where no one could hear. That phrase, later cited by prosecutors, became a chilling reminder of how secrecy and isolation enable harm. This section includes accounts of confinement. We share them carefully, not to dwell on hardship, but to examine how group dynamics and distorted faith can normalize the unthinkable. The cottage soon became a gathering point for the splinter sect. Present were Clara and Katarzyna Maurova, Barbara Shkrelova, still disguised as the sick child Anichka, and accomplices Jan, Hanna, and another individual introduced as Anichka's brother. Together, they formed a circle of adults convinced they were fulfilling a spiritual mission. Here lies a crucial lesson when several adults collectively justify secrecy, harsh discipline, or cutting children off from oversight. It is not unconventional parenting. It is a red flag demanding outside scrutiny. Critical question: if someone had intervened at this stage, how differently might events have unfolded? For 8 consecutive days, Andrei and Jakub were kept under conditions described in court as unlawful confinement. Testimony later painted a picture of restricted spaces and routines that denied them comfort, while Barbara, in her role as Anichka, continued to whisper that the boys were causing trouble. Each accusation reinforced the group's distorted belief system, strengthening their resolve instead of shattering it. When those 8 days ended, the group returned to Kuzim, but the nightmare simply shifted form. The basement of the Maurova home was converted into a place of constant surveillance. A baby monitor was installed, presented as a way to watch over the boys from above. In truth, it became a tool of control. And yet, in a twist of fate, that same device would later become the key to exposing the truth. The contrast could not have been greater. Above ground, an ordinary suburban home, complete with the signs of everyday family life. Below, an environment of isolation and fear. This duality, normalcy on the surface, darkness hidden beneath, remains one of the most haunting aspects of the case. Details like these highlight a painful reality mistreatment often hides in plain sight. Teachers, neighbors, extended family all noticed fragments of concern. But what seemed minor, missed soccer games. Cancelled visits was part of a much larger pattern. And so we must ask what happens when communities fail to connect the dots. What reforms are needed so that warning signs are not missed again? Even in the darkest moments, sometimes help comes from unexpected places. If you ever sense something is wrong, even if you can't prove it, speak up. Your concern might be the voice a child desperately needs. And as Andrei and Jakub sank into despair, an unexpected ray of hope would indeed emerge from the very device meant to monitor their hardship. The following describes the rescue of children in distress. These details, drawn from official records, are not shared for sensation, but to highlight how community vigilance can save lives. On May 7, 2007, Edward K., a resident living near the Maurova home, was adjusting his own baby monitor to check on his infant child. The device suddenly picked up interference, another signal bleeding through. On his screen appeared an image that would change everything: a young boy, visibly distressed, sitting in what looked like a confined space. Edward's first thought was that he must be mistaken. He adjusted the monitor, switched channels, but the image remained. The boy hardly moved, resting against a wall, occasionally shifting position. The quality was grainy, but the situation was unmistakably wrong. Edward watched for several minutes, disbelief turning into urgent alarm as he realized this was happening in real time somewhere close to his own home. Friends, what you're about to hear is painful, but vital. This moment reminds us vigilance is not paranoia, it is responsibility. If you see something unusual, even if you're unsure, act. Would you have made the call? Without hesitation, Edward picked up the phone. "There's a child," he told the dispatcher, his voice shaking. "I can see him on my baby monitor. He's in a restricted area. This is real. This is happening right now. The dispatcher, trained to filter strange calls, heard the urgency in Edward's voice and treated it as a priority. Police traced the signal to the Maurova home on Viveska Street. Officers arrived with a social worker, expecting perhaps to find a misunderstanding. Clara answered the door calmly, insisting nothing was wrong. But the officers pressed for a search. The next discovery is difficult to hear. It is shared carefully to underline one lesson: mistreatment can hide in plain sight. An urgent intervention can mean the difference between safety and tragedy. In the basement, Andre was found in conditions that required immediate medical care. Jakob was discovered in another area of the house, similarly isolated. A third child was present, the supposed 13-year-old Anichka, who appeared distressed but whose situation seemed notably different from the boys. Medical staff documented their observations in professional, clinical language evidence that would later become crucial in court. Their careful reports ensured that justice could proceed while protecting the boys' dignity. This case illustrates systemic failures in child protection. If this subject is difficult for you, please take care. Our goal here is not to dwell on cruelty, but to understand how warning signs are missed and how communities can respond better. The boys were transferred first to University Hospital Brno, then to the Klokanek Children's Center for Recovery. Staff worked with professionalism, though some later admitted retreating to break rooms in tears. One doctor stated that in 20 years of pediatric medicine, he had never witnessed such a systematic pattern of manipulation and neglect. Edouard's decision to act without second-guessing, without waiting, saved 2 lives. When something seems wrong, especially involving children, immediate action is not overreaction. It is duty. And this is why these stories are told. Awareness saves lives. For every case that makes headlines, many more remain hidden. What will it take for us, as neighbors, teachers, or friends, to connect the dots sooner? As news of the discovery spread through Kuzim, the community struggled to reconcile the Clara they thought they knew with the reality uncovered in her basement. But the investigation was only beginning, and what detectives would soon uncover about Anichka and the network behind her would shock even seasoned investigators. The police investigation that followed the boys' rescue would become one of the most complex child protection cases in Czech history. What began as a neighbor's emergency call quickly evolved into an international manhunt that stretched across borders and involved multiple law enforcement agencies. Detectives collected hundreds of pieces of evidence from the Maurova home. The baby monitor system once used to oversee the boys now became a tool of justice. More than 800 text messages were recovered between Clara and the doctor, each one documenting the systematic manipulation that had guided her actions. Email threads revealed how fragments of religious language had been twisted into instructions for control. The basement itself was carefully measured and photographed, every detail preserved for prosecutors. The next revelation forced investigators, and later the public, to confront just how far deception could go. What looked like compassion toward a child in need was in fact something very different. The most shocking discovery came when authorities examined Anichka. During routine intake at the Children's Center, staff noticed glaring inconsistencies. Dental records suggested someone far older. Her vocabulary and behavior did not match her story of being a trafficked 13-year-old. DNA testing confirmed the unthinkable: Anichka was actually Barbara Shkalova, a 34-year-old woman. Further investigation showed how deeply this identity fraud had run. Barbara's condition, hyperpituitarism, gave her a childlike appearance she exploited with alarming skill. She had attended schools under false names, fooled teachers and classmates, even obtained medical care, all while maintaining her disguise. By the time police moved to arrest her, she had already disappeared. Cases like this remind us that procedures such as medical verification, background checks, and proper documentation are not bureaucratic red tape. They are safeguards, essential barriers that protect real children and prevent individuals who exploit trust from infiltrating systems of care. Barbara's disappearance triggered an international search. Czech authorities traced her to Denmark, where she had assumed yet another disguise, this time as a 13-year-old Norwegian boy named Adam. For months, she attended school, lived with a foster family, and integrated into daily life. Teachers saw nothing unusual. It wasn't until Czech police, working with Interpol, provided her DNA profile and photograph that the deception finally collapsed. Meanwhile, the investigation widened to expose the larger network. Joseph Schkurl, Barbara's father, and the man behind the Doctor persona, was identified as leader of a sect expelled from the Grail movement in 1996 for distorting spiritual teachings into authoritarian control. His followers included not only Klara and Kateřina Maurova, but also Jan Turek, Hanna Basheva, and others who had gathered at the cottage. Each arrest revealed the same pattern: faith twisted into obedience. Obedience weaponized against conscience. This raises an uncomfortable question for all of us. How does devotion cross the line into destruction? And how can communities tell the difference between genuine faith and distorted belief? Investigators also uncovered a painful truth. The warning signs had been present all along. The boy's father had raised alarms during custody disputes. Teachers had noted their withdrawal. Grandparents had been shut out. But these reports existed in isolation, each dismissed on its own. No one connected the dots until it was nearly too late. Neighbors and teachers later recalled memories that, in hindsight, carried new weight, missed soccer practices, cancelled Sunday dinners, elaborate excuses about illness and study, the odd behavior surrounding Anichka. Each was a piece of a puzzle scattered too widely for anyone to assemble. The father's warnings, once dismissed as bitterness, were tragically vindicated. As prosecutors built their case, they confronted the most unsettling question: how could so many adults participate in, or enable, such harm? The answer did not lie in simple malice, but in the combined force of coercive control, group psychology, and the dangerous assumption that religious devotion automatically equals moral behavior. The trial began in October 2008 at the Brno Regional Court, drawing international media attention and forcing Czech society to confront uncomfortable truths about child protection failures. Prosecutors presented a case built on 800 text messages, hours of baby monitor footage, medical documentation, and testimony from over 30 witnesses. What follows is drawn from court records. These details are not shared to sensationalize, but to understand how legal systems confront manipulation and misconduct, and why vigilance is everyone's responsibility. The lead prosecutor opened with a timeline stretching from late 2006 to May 2007, methodically showing how distorted faith had escalated into systematic mistreatment. Each message from the doctor was read aloud, exposing the calculated process of convincing a mother that her children were possessed. Baby monitor footage, shown only in restricted form to protect the boy's dignity, offered undeniable proof of unlawful confinement. Medical reports, presented in careful clinical language, confirmed prolonged neglect and psychological manipulation. Klara Maurova, now 31, appeared diminished, often crying during testimony. Her defense attorney argued she had been manipulated by stronger personalities, her sister Katarzyna and Josef Schkurl. She believed she was saving her children's souls. Her lawyer insisted. Klara testified that she now saw her actions as wrong, but maintained that at the time she believed she was following divine instruction. Katarzyna, 33, tried to frame herself as psychologically vulnerable, yet prosecutors pointed to her active role. She had brought Barbara into the home and participated in the confinement. Witnesses from the Papasek Youth Center testified that she appeared rational and competent in her daily work, undermining any claim of diminished capacity. Barbora Shkrlova's trial was the most unusual. Extradited from Norway, she entered the courtroom still appearing decades younger than her actual 34 years. She shifted between portraying herself as a victim and admitting to fabricating accusations against the boys. Her father, Josef Schkurl, the man behind the doctor persona, was tried separately, presented by prosecutors as the mastermind who orchestrated the hardship through others' hands. The prosecution emphasized a principle that resonated far beyond the courtroom: religious belief never justifies harm. parental rights end where a child's safety begins. And every adult who sensed something was wrong but remained silent carried morale, if not legal, responsibility. The boys were spared the ordeal of testifying in open court. Instead, jurors heard recorded interviews conducted by child psychologists. These careful sessions revealed the trauma without re-traumatizing the children. In one recording, Andre quietly described believing he would never leave the basement alive. Jakub recalled whispering stories to his younger brother, trying to preserve hope, their voices, preserved with compassion and professionalism, reminded everyone of the true cost of misplaced trust. The verdict was delivered in May 2009, and while it reflected the seriousness of the crimes, it immediately stirred controversy. Klara Maurova was sentenced to 9 years in prison, while her sister Katarzyna, judged the most active participant, received 10. Barbara Shkrlova, whose false identity had shocked the nation, was given 5 years. Their accomplices, Jan Turek and Hanna Bashova, were sentenced to 5 and 7 years respectively. At the center of it all, Josef Shkrl, the man behind the Doctor persona, was sentenced to 7 years for orchestrating the misconduct from the shadows. Were these sentences enough? Many in the courtroom and across Europe thought not. Child advocacy groups argued that all defendants could serve only 2/3 of their terms with good behavior. The boy's father expressed bitter relief justice had arrived, but far too late to prevent years of hardship he had long tried to warn about. The trial exposed systemic failures at every level family courts that dismissed a father's concerns, social services that failed to act on red flags, schools that accepted excuses without verification, and a community that prioritized politeness over protection. The outcome, however, was not only punishment, it forced reform. Parliament fast-tracked legislation quickly known as the Kuzim Amendments, requiring stricter background checks for foster arrangements, mandatory reporting of suspected mistreatment, and better coordination between schools, hospitals, and social services. It was a public admission that the system had catastrophically failed Andre and Jakub. And yet, even as the defendants were led away, one haunting question remained: how many other children are still living in silence, hidden behind closed doors, without a chance encounter to bring the truth to light? The Kuzum case did not end with the conviction of its perpetrators. Beyond the courtroom lay a wider circle of responsibility, less about law, more about conscience. It forced Czech society to confront an unsettling truth. So many had seen the signs, yet no one truly acted. Until fate and a baby monitor revealed the boys' hidden hardship. The first to sound the alarm had been their father. During divorce proceedings in 2006, he warned the court of Klara's erratic behavior and growing obsession with religion. He begged for psychological evaluation and asked that visits be supervised. Instead, his words were brushed aside as bitterness from a custody battle, following the old assumption that children belong with their mother. The judge gave Klara full custody. Years later, that same judge would confess regret admitting that bias had clouded his judgment. The grandparents, too, had seen the changes, missed visits, unanswered calls, a Christmas without the boys. We thought about calling authorities, the grandmother told investigators. But what would we say that our daughter wouldn't let us see them? We had no proof. Their silence was not indifference, but fear of tearing apart what was left of family ties. Yet, in choosing quiet, they left the boys without their strongest defenders. At school, the warnings multiplied. Teachers noted more absences, children who no longer laughed, who flinched when touched, who hesitated to change for gym class. One teacher even filed a formal concern, describing Andre as unusually fearful and the boys as shadows of their former selves. But when Klara produced medical notes, the matter ended there. No one knocked on the family's door. No one looked further. Each person saw only a fragment. None pieced the fragments together. Even outside the classroom, unease lingered. Neighbors noticed the boys no longer played outside, that invitations were politely refused, that the family seemed to vanish behind their walls. One neighbor saw Clara carrying what looked like cage parts into the house, but assumed it must be for pets. Another admitted hearing crying, but convinced herself it was normal. In a culture where people are taught to mind their own business, instinct was too easily replaced by hesitation. The religious community was no different. The official Grail movement had expelled Josef Scurl's group for their disturbing teachings. Yet no one thought to warn the authorities that children were living among people who believed discipline was purification, and innocence could be tainted by evil. Doctors, too, failed in their duty. When Anichka, in reality, Barbara was brought in for treatment, no one questioned the lack of official guardianship. They simply trusted the adults who presented her. In this long chain of silence, there was one break, Edward. The neighbor who picked up strange sounds on his baby monitor. He acted when others had rationalized, and in doing so, he saved lives. His courage was proof that sometimes it takes only one person to shatter the silence that shields harm. The revelations of Kuzim sparked something larger than outrage. They opened a national conversation. Czech radio asked listeners to recall moments when they had suspected mistreatment but stayed silent. Letters and calls poured in, filled with regret, shame, and recognition. Society began to wrestle with the delicate balance between privacy and protection, between the fear of false accusations and the cost of doing nothing. Child advocates seized the moment, launching campaigns that urged, see something, say something. Schools and community centers began training ordinary people to recognize early warning signs and to understand that raising a concern was not an accusation. It was an act of care. The lesson of Kuzim remains clear: harm thrives not only through misconduct, but through silence. It hides in the gaps between institutions, in the hesitation between suspicion and action. Protecting children does not mean investigating or accusing, it means speaking, sharing, and refusing to look away. Silence has power, but so does one voice that dares to break it. The revelation of what happened inside the Mauer of a home sent shockwaves through Kuzim and across the Czech Republic. A quiet town that prided itself on neighborly closeness was forced to face a devastating truth. Unimaginable harm had unfolded behind an ordinary facade. In the aftermath, Kuzim fell into collective trauma. Town hall meetings overflowed with residents demanding answers. How did we miss this? Why didn't anyone act? Parents questioned their instincts. Teachers re-examined their protocols. And neighbors looked at each other with unease, part guilt, part suspicion. Even the local church struggled. If faith could be twisted into such darkness, what could still be trusted? The government responded swiftly. Within 6 months of the trial, Parliament passed the Kuzim Law's mandatory ID verification for all children entering schools or medical care, background checks for anyone taking informal custody, and a centralized database to connect concerns from teachers, doctors, and social workers. The reforms recognized a hard truth: protecting children cannot rely on isolated eyes, but on a network that turns scattered concerns into action. Training programs spread nationwide. Teachers learned to document patterns, doctors to verify guardianship, and social workers to intervene when children simply disappeared from public life. The baby monitor that saved Andrei and Jakub became a symbol of vigilance, an everyday object reminding people that protection can come from unlikely places. Edward, the neighbor who acted without hesitation, quietly declined recognition, saying only that he did what anyone should do. Support groups formed for those burdened by silence. The boy's grandmother, once paralyzed by fear of causing trouble, became an advocate urging others to speak up. Schools adopted the Kuzim checklist to systematically flag multiple warning signs. Even religious communities reformed, introducing stricter oversight and challenging the assumption that faith automatically equals safety. Most importantly, the case reshaped public understanding. Those who mistreat are no longer imagined only as strangers lurking outside. but recognized as trusted figures within respected homes. The Maurova case revealed that harm can wear the mask of education, faith, and family. A year after the rescue, Kujim held a candlelight vigil not only for Andrei and Jakub, but for all children hidden in hardship. Thousands stood together, each flame a vow that silence would never again outweigh a child's safety. Today, Andrei and Jakub live under protected identities, their whereabouts known only to a select few who ensure their safety and privacy. They are teenagers now, carrying scars both visible and invisible, rebuilding lives that were nearly destroyed in a basement in Kuzum. Their recovery continues not as a destination, but as a daily journey of reclaiming the childhood that was stolen from them. The house on Vaverska Street stands empty, a silent reminder that darkness doesn't announce itself with obvious signs. It hides behind teaching degrees and church attendance, behind reasonable explanations and family privacy. The basement where the boys once endured hardship has been sealed, but the lessons from that darkness continue to resonate throughout Czech society and beyond. We tell this story not to sensationalize their suffering, but to honor a simple truth: Andrei and Jakub survived because one neighbor chose action over doubt. Eduard's baby monitor accidentally intercepted their silent prison. But it was his immediate response, his refusal to explain away what he saw, that transformed discovery into rescue. In a world where we're taught to mind our own business, his example reminds us that sometimes the most important thing we can do is to mind someone else's. The Kujim case leaves us with uncomfortable questions that demand honest answers. How many children right now are trapped behind closed doors, waiting for someone to notice their absence? How many warning signs are we explaining away because intervention feels uncomfortable? How many Andres and Jakubs are suffering while we choose the safety of silence? The systemic reforms sparked by this case: mandatory reporting, integrated databases, verification protocols are important, but systems are only as strong as the people within them. Every teacher who documents a concern, every neighbor who reports something troubling, every relative who pushes past politeness to ask difficult questions, these are the true guardians of children's safety. If this story disturbs you, good. Let that discomfort transform into vigilance. Let it make you question the child who suddenly stops playing outside, the family that gradually withdraws from community life, the explanations that seem designed to stop questions rather than answer them. Your concern might be nothing, and that's okay, but it might be everything to a child who has no other hope of rescue. Be the voice that breaks the silence. If you suspect a child is being mistreated or neglected, contact your local child protection services immediately. Your call could be the key that unlocks a hidden door. Your courage could be the light that pierces darkness. Don't wait for absolute certainty, wait for that. And it might be too late. The legacy of Andrei and Jakub isn't just in the laws that changed or the awareness raised. It's in every person who now pays attention, who chooses difficult action over comfortable inaction, who understands that protecting children is not someone else's responsibility, it's ours, all of ours. Their story began with laughter in the streets of Kuzim, two boys playing soccer, sneaking apple strudel, helping in grandfather's garden. It nearly ended in silence and shadows, but it continues now in every choice we make to see, to speak, to act. Their survival demands our vigilance. Their hardship requires our courage. The baby monitor that saved them has long since been replaced by newer technology, but the lesson it represents is timeless sometimes. Salvation comes from unexpected places, through unintended channels, carried by ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things. Be that person, be that voice, be the reason another child's story doesn't end in darkness. Awareness is the light that prevents silence from winning. Share their story. Spread this message. Let Kuzim's tragedy become tomorrow's prevention.